Good afternoon. My name is Chris Balogh, and I'm Principal for Alternative Education at Atascadero Unified School District. For the purpose of today, it's important for you to realize that alternative education encompasses 4 different programs for Atascadero. One is Paloma Creek High School, which is our continuation high school. That is for students that have reached the age of 16, and they are in danger of not graduating and earning a diploma. Atascadero Choices in Education Academy, affectionately known as ACE Academy, is an alternative school in Atascadero. It's for kindergarten through 12th grade students. We cater to homeschool families and independent study students, families who are looking for an alternative to the classic model of education. We also run home and hospital services, which serve students for an hour a day for each day of instruction that they miss. Students in home and hospital have been diagnosed from a doctor, and they are confined to home for a temporary period of time. We also monitor truancy in the district, and we meet with students and families and try to find ways to encourage them and motivate them and eliminate barriers so that they can come to school. So for the context of understanding Lighthouse, I think it's important to understand that those are the 4 main programs under alternative education. In my over 20 years of working in schools, the best predictor of school success is not what a lot of people think it is. If you look at funding priorities and you look at policies, I believe that a lot of people would think that IQ scores and test scores predict how a student may be or may not be successful in school. But the latest research is pretty clear. We look at what's called the EQ, or the emotional quotient. The question that we need to ask our students and ourselves is, how well does a child respond to the stresses in their life? That in and of itself becomes a greater predictor of school success than their actual ability to attend to reading and math. My experiences across California in a number of different counties and grade levels has always been that the focus in school is academics, and I get it, that makes sense. If a student doesn't learn math, for example, we try and we try again, and we try different ways to teach those math facts and get those math facts ingrained into students' head. We group kids based on their inability to learn certain math facts or learn certain reading skills. We group them based on the behaviors that they exhibit in school, their identified disability. But often too much the practice has been that once they're grouped, we slow down the curriculum or we speed up the curriculum. There's more repetition. But it's still the focus has been on academics. And one area that's been overlooked for far too long, I believe, is the emotional quotient. And it's not that the student can't learn the math facts. The problem is that there's a barrier preventing them to accessing the learning. And that barrier often comes from trauma. Trauma in the school setting or trauma in home, it can be defined as how an individual responds to the stress. So some people respond, I guess we could say, really well to stress. They take deep breaths, they move on, they get some exercise. If you have kids, you know that kids respond to stress in different ways. Some of them cry, some of them throw a fit, some of them run away, some of them fight. These are all ways to respond to stress, and they're all ways to respond to trauma. And so what's important also to understand is that California doesn't set aside a specific funding stream that says, hey, this is how we're going to address students and trauma in order to unlock their learning. And we've known this for a long time. In 1943, Maslow published a theory on human motivation. And he said that in order for self-actualization to occur, and self-actualization is going to be the result of learning, you have to have some basic needs met. And those basic needs are food, adequate nutrition, shelter, clothing. You got to be cared for. You got to feel safe. Without these things in place, an individual doesn't want to learn. And we've known this for a really, really long time. But you also want to include love and belonging. But again, we've known this for a while, yet there's thought that these are the soft skills. These are things that we don't teach in school. There's no curriculum for these soft skills about coping or making sure that we have food and shelter and these basic needs. These basic needs have to be met first. With a focus on testing and the focus on academic outcomes, we end up with practitioners in the classroom and our schools and our policymakers we don't feel like there's enough time to address the soft skills. But the reality is that if we don't ever address the soft skills, we're never going to get to the tougher academic hard skills. So Maslow understood that back in 1943. In the late 90s, you can add to this information this study from CDC and Kaiser, the Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, which linked certain childhood traumatic events and the way that people responded to those traumas. Later were a huge predictor in how a child would do in school, and how they would do in their work life, and actually is directly related to life expectancy. So if a child has traumatic experiences, and remember that traumatic experience is different for each kid. It's how we respond to certain experiences that happen to us. But one of those coping skills to those traumatic experiences is drug abuse. And that became Lighthouse's focus, is like, let's look at the drug abuse problem and the deaths from overdoses. But in order to do that, you kind of got to back up and look at what's causing the drug abuse. And drug abuse is a coping skill, much like fighting or running away or crying. And these things can get in the way of a healthy, productive life. Another thing that's not really clearly understood, I think, largely about schools is a lot of people are like, well, you've got school counselors. You've got counselors in schools. Aren't they taking care of the soft stuff? Aren't they taking care of the kids? And the answer is yes, they are taking care of our kids. But a school counselor's job goes way beyond meeting emotional needs of students. It's scheduling, it's preparing, it's academically placing them in classes. It's solving day-to-day peer conflict or adult to student conflict. They're not doing long-term therapy. And you're not going to find a lot of counselors in elementary schools either. You're going to find them at the secondary level. But they're not the kind of therapists that are needed to really address trauma and the experiences that we see that are growing in our schools today. So, and again, while community resources exist, there are therapists in the community, there are public services that address these issues. What I found is that the students that are in most need have trouble accessing those services, and they could have trouble accessing those services because of transportation, of insurance or financial barriers. Just the ability to follow through with an appointment and get from point A to point B on time becomes a barrier, or the stigma that's involved with seeking out medical help or mental health support. Those are things that get in the way. When Lighthouse first formed in 2012, the immediate need was to obviously address a group of students that were addicted. And no one doubts that is the first place to start. Treatment for individuals that are suffering from addiction, that's an obvious need. Like, let's address that need so that they can then access school. So our first efforts were to contract the services through a third party of a part-time therapist to come onto campus and do an intervention with students and provide treatment at school. We agreed early on that the just don't do drugs approach, that authoritative approach, was not one that had been successful in schools. So we adopted a research-based practice that sought to have individuals use a lot of reflection, to work side by side with their counselor as a coach, to look at their decisions on a daily basis and how those decisions affected their life goals, their daily goals. And we found that was moving in the right direction. Then, as time went on, we discovered new things. We found new ways to continue the funding, and we connected with local agencies to extend contracts with different therapists to address drug abuse. As our program grew, we also learned that students who were not abusing drugs also benefited from counseling and therapeutic services, because maybe they didn't have an addiction problem themselves, but most people in our community knew someone, or they had a family member. And that in and of itself is a difficult experience. That could be a traumatic experience. So students who were not abusing drugs but maybe had something going on in their family were benefiting from these services. Programmatically, we struggled with how and when to deliver these services. If you deliver a counseling service during the school day, sometimes that conflicts with expectations of the academic expectations that are from the classroom. If you deliver those services after school, students don't come. You have attendance problems with students wanting to attend counseling. We also were challenged by increase of costs of those contracts to those services. If we contract services of a therapist, we don't have really control over the time when that therapist arrives. We don't have control over the cost. We don't have control over the training. And we found that the availability became a struggle too. We were trying to match the needs of students with the availability of the therapists that we had on contract. There's also a stigma involved with school districts taking on the battle of drug use. And if you don't communicate early and you don't communicate clearly, then people in the community make up their own ideas about what's going on at school. So for a school district to take on the idea that drug use is a problem in the schools, it seems obvious that, I would think, to the common person, that drug use and drug availability of children in schools and our community is widespread wherever you go. But for some reason, the leaders in our schools were shy. We don't want to advertise the fact that there's a drug problem, when reality is everybody went to school, everybody saw it. It's been going on for years. It's nothing new. But if you don't tell the story, then people make up their own things. They'll believe that there's a needle exchange program going on, or there's a detox program going on your campus. And so you got to get the message out there clear, but you've got to overcome that stigma. And people like to externalize the problem. Early on, I would take students that were involved in the coffee company to neighboring cities. And the students would talk about the coffee business. They would talk about the problem of drug addiction and the struggles in our community. And while the people on the other end in the other communities were very generous, they're very receptive, there was always this sort of line or tune near the end of our conversation that would be, I'm sorry that drug abuse is such a problem in your community. I've heard that it's a problem in your community. And at first I just thought that they weren't listening, but then I realized that this is just what people do. We externalize the problem. And that was part of the problem of schools and school districts. It's somebody else's problem. It's not our problem. And that's where Lighthouse has really made an impact, is that we embrace that this is an issue and that it affects all of us. So those are some of the barriers that we had to deal with. We also started recognizing some new needs. We witnessed that at Tascadero Choices in Education Academy, our ACE Academy, the need for that school started increasing. We had a number of teens that began receiving mental health services and being diagnosed with anxiety and depression. And these students were going to the doctor, and the doctor was writing notes saying that they should be on home and hospital services and that they should stay home. The problem with home and hospital services, again, is that home and hospital is set up for a broken leg. It's for a surgery. It's a temporary problem, a temporary fix for a temporary problem. It's not a long-term solution. And we had students that are battling with depression and anxiety. This is a lifelong problem. And not going to school and receiving an hour of instruction per day is not an adequate solution. And then a lot of the students were bypassing the medical industry. They were just coming to ACE Academy, trying to avoid the stressors of a traditional school. And so it's clear that the students needed medical services, mental or physical medical services, but without the financial backing or the support from their family or the understanding of how to address it, they weren't getting it. And so they're not returning to school. They're left to their own devices to come up with their own coping behaviors. And I've addressed the coping behaviors already, but I start to call them pre-addictive behaviors. So if your needs aren't met, you're going to search out ways, and some of those are going to be negative. And a lot of those they might not be drug abuse now, but they're going to be drug abuse in the future. And that's prescription drug abuse and illegal drug abuse. In order to address this solution at ACE Academy, we started Option School. It's really a school within a school. We saw that there were a lot of students on this home and hospital program, and what we wanted, we just decided that that was not adequate. So we brought them to school 2 days a week for about 4 hours each day. And this allows a small group of students to come in and access face-to-face support from teachers, to have positive peer-to-peer interaction, and to access our therapist. So our therapist is here. We're bringing the kids in to access the therapy that they would not be getting outside, and we're eliminating the isolation that they're getting by being on home and hospital services. Our goal is to keep kids connected. We want them to stay academically connected, socially connected. We want them to return to school. Within this growth and with our ability to contract services, we realized that contracting a part-time therapist to deal with drug abuse solely was really not sufficient to meet the needs of the students and the demands that they really require. So we had moved from meeting the specific needs of a drug-addicted group of individuals to really a wider variety of mental health issues, primarily anxiety and depression, social difficulties. So we realized that we needed not only a therapist full-time, but we needed a therapist that was not in the intern stage, that was not limited to drug and alcohol, but had a wide variety of tools and a wide variety of experiences to address this wide variety of needs about why students are not going to school or not being successful in school. So what does it look like today? Last year, we were fortunate enough with our partnership, our school district and Lighthouse was able to generate enough funding that alternative education is able to hire a full-time licensed therapist to specifically serve students in alternative education. A therapist now works side by side with our teachers, our staff, our students, collaborates with families, is in and out of classrooms, offering a number of different therapeutic models. This is individual counseling, group counseling, family counseling, after-hours counseling. The ability to hire and retain our own therapist and decide what those qualifications of that therapist have has been instrumental in transforming where our program is and where we're going to take this from here on out. With the greater availability of a therapist allows us just to, again, more kids can access the services they need. When we started this program in 2012, we had about 30 secondary students that were coming to independent study. Today, we are pushing 150 students that are seeking out our services. They're not on home and hospital, they're not from school, they're working on independent study, and they're seeing our therapist, and they're coming in part-time to school, and that includes middle school students and high school students. The other component is that all our teachers in alternative education are on board. There's not a conflict anymore between the academic and the social emotional needs of our students. I can say that our teachers prioritize the mental health of our students, and that's because they understand Maslow. They understand that in order to unlock the learning, you've got to meet these basic needs. You've got to address the stresses that are going on in a student's life. So our continuation high school students can access therapy during the day. They can get academic for attending therapy during the day. We use a combination of in-class and online education so that if a student needs to leave class, they're not going to miss credit. They're not going to be penalized for missing class. They're getting what they need, and we're prioritizing that they get what they need so that they when they do come back to the classroom, they're more able to access the learning, and they're able to learn the harder academic skills that we want them to learn. The program also now, it's beyond a therapeutic component, I think. It's beyond treatment. It's beyond addressing anxiety and depression. We see alternative education as a way to serve our community. And our students that come to alternative education, we really want them to not be stigmatized by coming to alternative education. Part of that is branding our schools as viable options to get a high school diploma and move on to college, and that everybody's got a different path. And we don't want to look at alternative education as those students. Well, I always say those. It's those students. Thanks for, how do you deal with those students? You know, there are students. There are students in our community, and we have to value our children in our community. They're all our children. In order for us to have a stronger community that is resistant to poor coping choices and drug abuse, we need our children to feel valued, and they need to feel like they can contribute in positive and meaningful ways. And that's really where Lighthouse has come to this day in alternative education and throughout the district, is through the coffee company, through other ways. We're getting students out in the community so that they have a reason to get up out of bed in the morning. That's one of the things that you want out of your community members, to get up and feel like you can contribute, you can make a difference in your community. And we're going to practice that on a daily basis, and we couldn't do that without the support from Lighthouse, through the access of a therapist and through the additional funding. It's really about getting those kids connected, our kids connected, and that's where Lighthouse is making a difference. Thanks.